Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are attempting something that sounds, well, frankly, impossible. We're going to dive deep into the art of mind reading. But hold on, let's be really clear right up front. We are throwing the supernatural stuff right out. No crystals, no telepathy involved here. Okay, let's unpack this then. We've got this framework, this book called The Art of Reading Minds, chapter by chapter. And the core idea right from chapter 1 is that real mind reading isn't magic at all. It's a skill, something you can learn. It's all about paying super close attention, almost like a detective, to the tiny cues everyone gives off constantly. So we have this structured path laid out, starting with just observing the body, moving through understanding words, and then even getting into ethical influence. Our mission today, to give you a kind of shortcut, really, a way to understand how people reveal what they're thinking, if you just know where to look.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, I think, is how it takes this almost mythical idea of mind reading and just grounds it completely in, well, basic psychology and how people behave. The whole idea rests on this. People always show their thoughts through their behavior. Always. Whether they mean to or not. It's like our internal emotional system is just faster, less controllable than the part of us choosing the words. So this deep dive, it's really about showing you exactly what behaviors, what cues you need to zoom in on to become, well, a better observer, more insightful.
That sounds incredibly useful, like a serious upgrade for just everyday interactions. Okay, let's start right at the foundation then. Section 1, the language of the body. So first up, debunking the myth and establishing the baseline. This draws from chapters 1 and 2. The core concept seems simple enough. Pay attention, people reveal their thoughts. But hang on, if we're all trying so hard to control how we appear, control our words, why does this keep happening? Why does the body, rat out the mind?
Well, it goes right back to biology, really. Chapter 2 hits this hard. The sheer raw power of nonverbal communication. You see all these studies, right? They consistently suggest that nonverbal signals, everything from how you stand to tiny little facial twitches, make up the vast, vast majority of what's actually being communicated. We're talking like upwards of 70, sometimes even 90%. We spend all this energy polishing the script, our words, but we forget the director's notes. The body signals are just broadcast out there, unfiltered.
And that brings us to what the source calls the leakage effect. Okay, I think understanding why this leakage happens is key to actually spotting it. It's not just random body language. It's the real emotion forcing its way out.
Exactly. Leakage. It's what happens when there's a clash inside between two big parts of the brain. You've got the limbic system, that's your immediate gut reaction emotional center. And then there's the neocortex, the thinking, planning, talking part that tries to manage everything. So when a strong, genuine emotion like fear, or maybe you strongly disagree but can't say it, or hidden excitement pops up in the limbic system, it triggers instant physical stuff. Heart races, muscles tense up, maybe a fleeting look on your face. Then the neocortex tries to step in, suppress it, and say something different, like, oh, I'm fine, or yeah, I totally agree, but the physical signals leak out anyway because that emotional brain is just way faster.
Got it. So, if someone's getting tough feedback at work and they say, yep, understand completely, I'll adjust, but you see their hands clenching under the table or their jaw tightens up.
Perfect example.
That clenching, that tension, that's the leakage. The body's telling the real story, maybe fear, maybe anger, that the words are trying to cover up.
Exactly right. The body is, well, it's a pretty bad liar, fundamentally, and slow. So the source material lays out these key nonverbal signals we need to train ourselves to see. Beyond the face, we'll get to that in a bit. Posture is huge. Are they open, relaxed, leaning in maybe?
Yeah.
Or are they closed off, hunched over, kind of shielding themselves? That closed posture usually screams defensiveness or, psychological withdrawal.
And hand movements too, right? Gestures. Are they big and open, palms visible maybe, suggesting confidence, honesty? Or are they small, fidgety things, like rubbing the back of their neck, drumming fingers, stuff that suggests anxiety, or maybe they're trying to self-soothe because they're stressed?
Definitely. And we also have to factor in proxemics, the whole study of personal space, how close someone stands. This is more subtle than just seeing someone physically back away. The source talks about these 4 zones, right? Intimate distance, like touching to maybe 1.5 feet for close relationships. Personal distance, maybe 1.5 to 4 feet for friends. Then social distance, 4 to 12 feet, typical for business stuff, more formal things. And public distance, over 12 feet, like for a speech. So if you step into someone's personal zone, maybe you're trying to build rapport, and they subtly shift back to reestablish that social distance.
Oh, okay.
That little shuffle, that physical adjustment, it signals discomfort or maybe a lack of connection. And it happens before they even have to say anything awkward.
And that comfort level with distance must vary wildly depending on culture, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Massively.
Yeah.
You ignore cultural norms, you're guaranteed to misread the situation. Someone from one culture might feel 4 feet apart is really cold and distant. Someone else might feel anything less than 2 feet is way too close, invasive. So yeah, distance signals comfort, but what counts as comfortable is always relative. Context, culture, you have to factor that in. Which actually sets us up nicely for the next bit, reading the face and eyes from chapter 6. This is where we get into the really fine-grained stuff, the high-def data, so to speak.
Okay, microexpressions. This feels like a really key concept. We probably know the term, but let's break down the mechanics. Why are they considered like the gold standard for spotting hidden emotions?
It comes down to how fast they are, and the fact that they're involuntary. Microexpressions are these super quick, tiny facial movements. They flash across the face for maybe like a 25th of a second, up to half a second max. Your face has something like 43 different muscles, right? These expressions get triggered by that fast emotional limbic system we talked about. They completely bypass your conscious control. They're like a flash of truth. That momentary leak of the real feeling, fear, anger, sadness, contempt, before you can mask it.
And they're different from the more obvious expressions, like a big smile or a frown that you hold for longer. Those are macro expressions.
Exactly. Macro expressions, the longer ones, can definitely be faked. You can put on a smile, hold a frown. But let's say someone is faking being happy, putting on that big macro smile. A sharp observer might catch a split-second microflash of contempt, like one side of the lip curls up slightly, asymmetrically. That microexpression is way more reliable about their true feeling. Contempt, apparently, is one of the toughest ones to fully hide.
Interesting. Okay, what about the eyes? It's not just about pupil dilation, is it? The source talks about eye movements indicating how someone is thinking, like accessing memory versus making something up.
Yeah, this concept gets oversimplified sometimes, but it's valuable if you use it carefully, along with a baseline. The movement itself often signals cognitive effort. So the theory goes, if you ask someone to recall something visual, like what did your childhood bedroom look like? Their eyes might flick up and to one side accessing stored memory. But if you ask them to imagine something new, something they haven't seen, like picture a pink giraffe juggling chainsaws, well, their eyes might move up and to the other side, indicating construction, making it up.
So the direction potentially signals memory retrieval versus creative construction.
Potentially, yes. But the key takeaway shouldn't be just the direction, because that can vary person to person, even culture to culture sometimes. It has to be taken with a huge grain of salt. The more reliable signal is the process. The fact that their eyes are moving rapidly at all while they answer, especially a simple question. It signals intense internal processing, visual, auditory, whatever. It means their brain is working hard managing information, especially under pressure.
Okay, this all sounds incredibly powerful, but also, like you said, really easy to misinterpret if you just grab onto one little thing, right? Like, I see someone cross their arms once, and I immediately think defensive or lying. Which brings us perfectly to point C, reading signals in context. Chapter 7 really hammers this home, doesn't it, as a kind of safety net against jumping to conclusions.
Absolutely essential. Probably the most crucial insight from the whole framework is this: the cluster principle. Single gestures are just too unreliable. They're often totally misleading. Why? Because of confirmation bias. If you already suspect someone's lying, you'll subconsciously look for any little sign, a lip twitch, a foot tap, that confirms your suspicion, and you'll ignore everything else. So you have to look for clusters, multiple signals happening together consistently, all pointing in the same direction. That's the only way to draw a reasonably reliable conclusion.
Right, that forces you to look beyond your own bias. If I think someone's nervous, I might just see the fidgeting and ignore the relaxed posture, right? How does looking for a cluster prevent that?
Because it demands more evidence. Usually, like 3 or more independent signs all telling the same story. Take that defensiveness example. Just crossed arms. Could be anything. Maybe they're just cold. But a reliable cluster for defensiveness might be crossed arms, plus tight lips, plus maybe leaning back slightly, plus maybe giving really short, clipped answers. See, 4 signals together. The combined weight makes "they're just cold" a much less likely explanation. That pattern suggests real resistance.
And the opposite would be true too, an engagement cluster.
Exactly. Leaning forward and steady eye contact and maybe subtle nodding and open hand gestures when they speak, all those things together. That strongly indicates they're receptive, interested, much more reliable than just one nod by itself.
Okay, and the final check is always context, context, context.
Always. Context can completely change the meaning of a signal. Think about someone slumped in their chair. If it's a job interview, that posture probably signals nervousness, low confidence. But if they're slumped in exactly the same way, waiting for a bus at the crack of dawn, it just means they're tired. Ignoring the situation, the environment, that's the fastest way to get it totally wrong. You need to figure out what's normal for the situation before you can even start reading the person.
That makes total sense. And it makes the next step, decoding language, even trickier because words are something we consciously control, mostly. Okay, let's shift gears then. Move past the body into section 2, decoding subtlety and spotting lies. Now we're focusing on voice and words. All right, part A is listening between the lines, drawing from chapter 4. So we're shifting focus now from the body's involuntary leaks to how things are said. Even if the words are carefully chosen, the delivery can give the game away, right?
It's a really important shift, yeah, because while the body's reactions are often subconscious, the voices, well, it's highly sensitive to our internal state. The quality, the tone, the rhythm of your voice, a lot of that is actually driven by your autonomic nervous system. When you get stressed, what happens? Your vocal cords tighten up, your breathing gets shallower, the whole flow changes. So we're trying to listen past the literal words to catch that emotional subtext underneath.
And the source points to specific vocal clues.
Yeah.
Pitch, pace, pauses, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Let's break those down a bit. Voice pitch. That's often an immediate giveaway for tension. Stress, excitement, anxiety, they almost always make your pitch go up, subtly or sometimes quite noticeably, because those vocal cords are tightening. Then there's the pace, how fast someone's talking. You need to distinguish between nervous speed and excited speed. Nervous talking often sounds rushed, maybe a bit jumbled, lots of fillers like and excited talking is usually faster too, but it tends to be smoother, more confident, more articulate.
Okay, and pauses. They aren't all the same either. There's the normal pause for effect, and then there's the suspicious pause.
Right. The strategic, maybe slightly too long pause. That can be a sign of cognitive load. The person's brain is working overtime. They're basically buying time, maybe just milliseconds, for their thinking brain, the neocortex, to construct an answer while holding back the truth. So if you ask a simple question, like, did you finish that report yesterday? And there's this 3-second silence before they say yes, that pause itself is information. Something's going on there. We also look at emphasis, where they put the stress on words. I didn't take the money. Focusing on the action tells you something different than if they'd said, I didn't take the money. It shows where their internal focus lies.
That tiny shift makes a huge difference. And the source also mentions small word choices revealing core values or mindset.
Yes, this is what we can call linguistic leakage. It connects to the bigger picture. Things like pronoun choice, use of qualifiers, even grammar can show how connected or disconnected someone feels from what they're talking about. For example, people trying to distance themselves psychologically from something often use impersonal language. They might say, mistakes were made, instead of, I made a mistake. Or they use really technical jargon or passive voice when talking about something emotional or personal. That detachment itself is a signal. It suggests they're creating cognitive distance.
So if someone's describing a project failure and keeps saying the process failed, or the team ran into issues instead of, I missed this deadline or my part didn't work, that linguistic distancing is a form of leakage, showing maybe they aren't taking full ownership.
Precisely. That kind of nuance is vital. Which leads us directly into B, the nuance of spotting lies from chapter 9. If the body and voice leak truth, what specific signs, what fractures do we look for when someone is actively trying to deceive?
We're looking for the clash, right? Where the words say one thing but the nonverbals say another. That inconsistency is probably the biggest red flag.
It's a major one. That conflict between the verbal message and the nonverbal leakage we discussed. We also look for signs of that high cognitive load we mentioned. Lying is hard work. You have to juggle two stories, the truth and the lie, and monitor the other person's reaction and keep your own behavior in check. It's taxing. This often leads to those unusual or overly long pauses, especially right before delivering the deceptive part. Another big indicator is overcompensation, in behavior or emotion.
Overcompensation. Can you give an example? How does that look when someone's lying?
It often looks like they're trying too hard to sell it, to seem sincere. Someone telling the truth usually denies simply, directly, no, I didn't do it. Someone lying might overcompensate by giving way too much unnecessary detail about things that don't matter, trying to bury the lie in irrelevant facts. Or they get overly defensive, maybe attacking your question instead of just answering it. How dare you suggest I do that? I'm an honest person. I was actually doing this other thing very specifically at exactly that time. Authenticity tends to be simple. Fabrication often requires extra effort, extra details, extra drama.
But And this is a big but. The source stresses no single sign proves anything, right? No single gesture, no pause, no word choice automatically means lie. So how do we get closer to the truth if isolated signs aren't reliable?
This is where the baseline concept comes in again. It's absolutely critical. Observation is basically useless unless you first establish a person's baseline, their normal way of behaving when they're relaxed, not under pressure, just talking about everyday, neutral stuff. You need to notice things like how much do they normally blink? What's their typical posture? How often do they gesture? What's their usual speech rhythm and use of pauses?
So if someone is naturally very animated, talks fast, uses their hands a lot, that's their normal, their truthful baseline. We aren't looking for some universal lying signal. We're looking for signs that this specific person is deviating from their norm.
Exactly. That's the key. Once you have a sense of their baseline, then you look for deviations, especially clusters of deviations. If your normally animated, expressive colleague suddenly goes stiff, speaks way slower, avoids eye contact, and stops using I statements, that combination of changes, that cluster of deviations from their norm, that's what suggests something's up. Potential deception. It's the change in their pattern, the break from their usual style under pressure that carries the real information.
That makes so much more sense. It's about the change. Okay, let's shift now from just watching and listening passive observation into active interaction. And, importantly, ethical influence. Section 3, interaction, rapport, and influence. We kick this off with A, establishing trust through similarity from Chapter 3. So if we want people to relax, be more open, give us more genuine cues to read, we need to build a connection first. Rapport.
Rapport is absolutely the foundation. The source defines it pretty clearly. That feeling of connection, of similarity, of kinship you feel with someone. When people feel that sense of us, their psychological defenses tend to lower. They become more open, more receptive to what you're saying, and generally more honest. The trick is often to communicate that similarity subconsciously, kind of bypassing their critical, analytical mind.
Which leads us to mirroring. This sounds powerful, but also like it could go wrong easily. It's not just straight up copying someone, is it? That would be weird.
Oh yeah, definitely not outright mimicry. That's just insulting and obvious. Mirroring needs to be subtle, really subtle. It's about gently aligning parts of your own physical state with theirs, maybe subtly adjusting your posture to echo theirs, or matching the rhythm, the tempo of their main gestures. Not the exact gesture, but the energy behind it. The really deep level involves things like matching their breathing rhythm, which is super subconscious, or matching their tone of voice, their pace, their volume.
Wow, matching breathing. Why does that, or matching speech pace, work so effectively to build that connection, that rapport?
It taps into something really fundamental in the brain. Our brains are wired to see similarity as safety, as validation. When you subtly mirror someone's rhythm, their posture, their pace, their subconscious picks up on it. It registers as, this person is like me, or this person gets me. It creates this feeling of being understood, of being in sync, without them even consciously realizing why they suddenly feel more comfortable with you. It builds trust from the ground up.
Okay, now we get into some really advanced territory. Be anchoring and gentle influence from Chapter 5. The source mentions this draws from psychology, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah.
Can you define what an anchor is in this context? How do you actually create one?
Right. An anchor is basically a conditioned response. Think Pavlov's dogs, but for emotions. It's when you deliberately link a specific stimulus, something unique you see, hear, or feel, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, VAK, to a specific, strong internal feeling or emotional state. So let's say you're helping someone access a feeling of peak confidence. At the very moment they feel that confidence most strongly, you might apply a unique, specific touch, kinesthetic, maybe say a specific word or phrase in a specific tone, auditory, or make a unique gesture, visual. You create a multisensory trigger linked to that peak state.
So the goal is to forge a consistent link between that unique external trigger, the VAK combo, and the strong internal feeling, like confidence or calm or whatever.
Exactly. And the stronger and more unique the trigger, and the more consistently you pair it with the peak emotion, the stronger the anchor becomes. You're essentially wiring that connection neurologically. Then the application is, once that anchor is set, you can gently trigger that positive feeling later on just by reproducing the anchor, the touch, the word, the gesture, even when the person isn't consciously thinking about that peak state.
Can you give a practical example? How might you use this?
Okay, imagine a colleague is brilliant in brainstorming meetings, really creative, confident, but they totally freeze up during formal presentations. So during a brainstorming session, right when they have a breakthrough idea and are feeling that confident high, You might subtly say, squeeze their shoulder gently, kinesthetic, and say something specific like, that's the kind of insight we need in a particular tone, auditory. You do this consistently only when they're in that peak state. Later, just before their big presentation, a quick, subtle repetition of that same shoulder touch and maybe whispering that key phrase could help trigger that anchored state of creative confidence, helping them access those resources when they're feeling nervous.
That sounds incredibly potent, which brings us right back to ethics, doesn't it? If you can anchor states like that, the potential for misuse seems high.
It does, and the source is incredibly clear on this. This skill is presented specifically to show how you can influence gently, ethically, and without manipulation. The whole emphasis is on accessing positive states, positive resources, anchoring confidence, calm, focus, creativity. It's about helping someone be their best or fostering connection. It is absolutely not about exploiting fear or anxiety or creating negative states to control someone. That ethical line is crucial. It's about support, not manipulation.
That ethical compass needs to stay firmly in place as we move to C, persuasion and suggestion, from Chapter 8. How do we use language itself, moving beyond just triggering emotions to kind of guide thinking?
This gets into using words subtly to plant ideas. A key technique here is framing. Framing isn't just about presenting facts. It's about how you structure the conversation, how you define the boundaries of the choice.
I feel like I see this all the time in sales or marketing. Instead of asking, do you want to buy this, which invites a no.
Exactly. You reframe it. You structure the question to limit the no response. You might ask, so, considering the benefits we discussed, would implementing this on Monday or Wednesday work better for your team? You frame the choice as when to implement, not if. You're gently guiding them towards the yes by making it seem like the decision has already been made, and now it's just about logistics.
Clever. But influence isn't all logic, right? You mentioned earlier it's largely emotional. That's where storytelling comes in.
Absolutely. The source really highlights storytelling and using metaphors as powerful persuasive tools. Why? Because stories bypass our critical analytical defenses. When you listen to a good story, you get drawn in. You mentally experience it, feel the emotions along with the characters. You internalize the message or the moral of the story on a deeper level than if you were just given facts and figures. It makes the idea resonate emotionally. You persuade through shared experience, planting the suggestion within the narrative so it feels like their insight, not just your argument.
Okay, so we've journeyed from observing the body's leaks to decoding the voice, establishing baselines, and then using tools like mirroring and anchoring to actively connect and ethically influence. Let's bring it all together in our final section. Application and ethics. How do we use this in the real world? All right, Section 4A. Using the skills in everyday life. From Chapter 10, this is about putting it all into practice. Where can someone listening right now start applying these observation skills immediately to actually see a difference?
Oh, pretty much any situation where communication really matters. Think about work first. Negotiations, client meetings, team discussions. If you can read the subtle leakage, those micro expressions of doubt, the shifts away from baseline when a certain topic comes up, you get a much clearer picture of what's really going on beneath the surface. You might realize who's really hesitant about a proposal, even if they're nodding along politely. In a negotiation, maybe you spot increased self-soothing gestures like rubbing hands, or their voice pitch drops slightly when they say their final offer. That could suggest they're either bluffing or genuinely at their limit. That's critical info.
And outside of work, in personal relationships, this must be even more transformative there, right? Moving past just arguing about the surface stuff.
Huge difference. It helps you get to the root cause, not just deal with the symptoms. Like maybe your partner says they're stressed about, I don't know, finances. But you notice when they talk about it, they show that defensive cluster, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact, using vague language like things are tight instead of I'm worried. That cluster might reveal the real issue isn't just money, but maybe feeling insecure or unheard in the relationship more broadly. Reading those cues lets you address the deeper emotional reality. That builds way more trust and intimacy than just fixing the budget spreadsheet. And that's what the source really emphasizes as the true goal. Using these skills for better communication, stronger trust, deeper, more authentic connections.
So what does this all mean? Okay, let's try and synthesize. We started with a discipline of just watching, right?
Yeah.
Understanding that the body and voice often leak emotional truth because of that internal conflict between emotion and control. Then we moved to decoding the specifics, vocal tone, pace, micro-expressions, establishing those personal baselines so we can spot meaningful changes. And finally, we looked at active techniques like mirroring to build rapport and anchoring to gently influence states, always with that ethical guideline.
That journey is the whole point, I think. It's systematic. It boils down to disciplined, non-judgmental observation and recognizing patterns. It replaces guesswork and assumptions with actual data points you can see and hear. It shifts communication from being this mysterious art to a learnable skill set, grounded in how humans actually work.
Which brings us back one last time to the ethics of understanding. Because, as we've said, these skills, spotting vulnerability, building rapid trust, anchoring emotions, they are undeniably powerful.
They are profoundly powerful. And that ethical mandate from the source is non-negotiable. It has to be crystal clear. The aim is deep, empathetic understanding, full stop. It is not about exploitation or manipulation. When you master reading nonverbal cues, you gain insight into when people are stressed or sad or feeling vulnerable, even when they're trying to hide it. Seeing a micro-expression of sadness flash across the face of someone insisting they're fine, that insight isn't leverage. It's an opportunity to offer support, to ask a gentler question, to open the door for real connection.
So how do we draw that line clearly? Ethical influence versus manipulation.
Manipulation is using your observations of someone's state, maybe a weakness or vulnerability you spotted, to push them toward an outcome that benefits you, often at their expense or against their true wishes. It's self-serving, often coercive. Ethical influence, on the other hand, uses rapport, mirroring, maybe anchoring positive states to facilitate a shared positive outcome, to make communication clearer, safer, more effective for both parties, or to help someone access their own best resources. It's about using insight to connect and support, never to control or exploit. That empathy, that intention, is the ultimate test. Hashtag OTRO. You know, what's really fascinating when you boil it all down is that this whole art of reading minds isn't mystical at all. It's fundamentally about being a much more attentive, much more empathetic observer. It's about noticing the patterns, understanding the context, realizing that every single interaction, every conversation is just flooded with information if you know how to look and listen. The best decoders aren't psychic. They're just more patient, more disciplined, and ultimately more humane observers.
That's a fantastic summary. Thank you for guiding us through the sources and breaking down these complex ideas today. It's been a really insightful deep dive into this subtle language. And for everyone listening, we leave you with this to think about. If the ability to read these subtle cues, the microexpressions, the vocal shifts, the posture changes, is really just a skill, something anyone can potentially master with enough practice, what does that do to the whole idea of having an impenetrable poker face? Does it even exist? And could it mean that truly unguarded, completely authentic communication, the kind with zero leakage, is actually the rarest and maybe the most valuable thing in our interactions today?